Hey guys, welcome to the Making Your First Quilt mini-series where we'll be going through all of the steps to making a small quilt. Today's episode is just an introduction to the series and the materials you're going to need to get going. Alright, so to get started, in this photo I have most of the things you will need to make your quilt. Down here in the bottom left corner we have the fabric for making your quilt top. There are a couple different options here. You can use a 5-inch charm pack like I have here. Generally there are 42 pieces in one of these, which will allow you to make a 6x7 square quilt. The other option is to buy a bundle of fat quarters, which you can cut down into 5-inch squares. I recommend getting 5 different patterns if you're going to use fat quarters, and each fat quarter will get you about 8 5x5-inch squares, which means you'll get about a 6x6 square quilt or a 5x8 rectangular quilt. Directly above my charm pack there, you'll see I have a yellow fabric I'm going to be using for my backing, and it's got to be the same size as whatever your quilt is going to be. Again, you have a couple options here. You can do a solid fabric like I have here, or you can pick a patterned fabric and use that instead. Directly to the right of my charm pack, you're going to see that I have a roll of red 2-inch fabric, and that is going to be for our binding at the very end of the quilt. Alright, so next to my binding you can see my small scissors, which we'll be using to trim threads as we go. I also have my little rotary cutter, which we will be using to square up the edges of the quilt once all the layers are pinned together. And you will also be using this to cut your fat quarters into squares too, if that's the option you chose. And of course my rectangular ruler and cutting matter here for this also. Now right up top center I have my thread, which is pretty self-explanatory, and I have also got both clips and pins. Personally, I like using clips to hold my binding in place while sewing, but you can also use pins if that is what you have. You will also need pins to hold all of your layers together when you're quilting anyways. I am going to recommend that you either wash then iron your fabric or use a sizing and starching spray when you iron, and I'm going to show you why now. So on the right side you can see that to start my fabric was perfectly square. And on the left is what happened once the fabric got wet. It shrunk in an awkward direction, and to make all of my fabric even squares again, I had to trim them all down to 4.5-inch squares. Okay, so now that we've gone over our supplies, I'm going to show you the pattern that we're going to be following. So as you can see, it's really simple. There are 5 different fabrics, and we want 5 5-inch squares of each. They're going to be arranged so that the same fabric never touches. So our task at the end of this video is to prep all our fabric so that in part 1 we're ready to get sewing.